Well, hello to our new listeners. Thanks for joining. And to our returning guests, welcome back. Welcome to season 6 of the Sibyl podcast. My name is Mo. In this season, like you've been used to, get ready for more amazing stories, more inspirational stories to help you set your stories free. I created this podcast as a resource for Blacks, Asians, and those who love them, to share stories and processes, as well as to build communities around important salient issues that affect all of us as humans. So on this show, you get to hear amazing stories from people like you who show us how to get more out of life. The stories featured here are by people whose journey I am partly inspired by, as well as challenged by, but most importantly, people whose courage and vulnerability have afforded us an opportunity to hear their life stories, and I hope you find them as inspiring. Now enjoy the show, and don't forget to share this episode and the other ones.
Just sign up the fun. And so we get the shortest month in the year, but we're going to make it very loud and nonsense. And what better way to do this than having a chat with a Nigerian who is passionate about Pan-African relationships and also has made it her life work to close the social distance between us and our cousins. And these are the Blacks that are living here in the U.S. So today with me, I have the privilege of talking to a dynamic woman. I mean, she's loaded, guys. So let me just read all of her bio. It's going to take about 20 minutes. Just kidding, but it's quite long, but let's do it. She is a Nigerian immigrant of Yoruba ethnic diversity. And as a typical story of immigrants in America, she migrated to the U.S. for greener pastures in the early 80s. Since moving to the U.S., she completed her master's degree and is a proud mom of 2 adult children, and there's so love on her. If you follow her on Instagram, you know what I'm saying. She's super active. She's a blogger. She has written many issues, and she focuses on the life of African immigrants. About 6 years ago, she launched the Pánsá Pánsá Forum to start a conversation about first and second generations of African immigrant children growing up in American society. As you may know, or many of you might know, the African community is often divided along the lines of countries of origin, religion, and ethnic background. And her vision for that forum is to include African children from various ethnic backgrounds in this narrative. Now, she also strives to create an open platform for these children to express their challenges because, you know, they're neither here nor there. They're not American enough, they're neither African enough. And she tries to balance those two worlds of having, you know, the American identity and also maintaining their African heritage. And perhaps some of you listening to this might have children who might belong in those categories. How do you parent them through? How do you make them proud Blacks? And while also, you know, honoring both, you know, heritage that they have. Now, in today's episode, we'll be talking about, you know, just, you know, her life, moving to the U.S., thriving here, how to maintain the relationships between Africans and African Americans, and also contributing relatively to the Motherland. Everyone, please join me in welcoming the wonderful, the super talented, the super active, and definitely wonderful. I've said that twice because it's twice as good. Mrs. Kemi Seriki of the Pánsá Pánsá Forum. Hello, ma.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. You know, you're so generous, you know, with your introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so honored to have you. And I think it will be nice to kind of talk about how we met. So shout out to Nancy Malenwa of the Concrete Pastures podcast. I think you had featured on her podcast and you got to know about my podcast. I should just say that she emailed me, and for one reason or the other, I was sometime in December, it kind of fell into that moment where you're not checking emails because you're battling other fires. And then she sent another message, hey, I've been trying to reach out to you. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, man. But I want to just thank you for your tenacity and not giving up on me. And, you know, for even making this happen. It's been, you know, such a lovely time talking to you outside of the show. And I cannot wait for the listeners and even those that would end up watching this recorded version of this show to get to know more about you.
Thank you.
So let's start from the beginning. I definitely know you're of Yoruba ethnicity. What does it mean to be, I guess, how did you grow up and where did you grow up?
Well, I was born in Lagos and I grew up in Lagos. And
You know how they say Lagos is a no man's land?
Yes, it's a no man's land. So that's why I'm so used to New York. When you come from New York, no man's land. So I was born and raised in Lagos, and lived with my parents during the formative years. Then later on, when I was growing up, that was during the time when many parents believed that your children has to go and live with a teacher.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
In terms of understanding discipline.
Yeah.
So, you have to.
What were we thinking then?
Well, they think they have the whole package of actually discipline as well as educational, to prepare you for your educational achievement for life, in terms of, they don't have to pay extra teacher, pay for teachers to.
For the price of one.
I had to tutor you in so many things that you needed in school. So that was what they believed at that time. So I lived a little bit in Surulere. From there, moved to Festac. When it's Festac 77. Wow. After it was actually launched, after Festac 77, that people were putting in application to get the apartments. I mean, that place was, well kept, at that time. So I don't know how it is.
No, you don't want to know.
So I lived there for some time. Then it was later on that after finishing my high school, I actually went to Government College, Jojo.
Oh, nice.
Those are when those schools or government colleges in different states, as well as federal government colleges, that have so much diversity of students from different backgrounds.
I went to Oyo.
Oh, you went to Oyo, okay. The federal government college also, at that time, you actually have so many other people from different countries who are actually part of the students in those atmosphere, the environment. So I went to that government college, then after that, I came to America. And since then, I've been here since then.
Wow. So you've been here since the 80s. And I think before the show started, we talked about just New York. Why did you move to the U.S.? I imagine that let me just assume that similarly with most immigrants coming here, we're seeking greener pastures. But in the 80s, Nigeria's economy was way more robust than it is now. So for people like you then, in your cohort, what was the push towards the side of the world?
Well, it was something that at that time, people were actually coming to abroad at that time just to go to school, to acquire the education. Because if you get the opportunity to say that you're coming abroad, is something that you say, okay, let me go and just get my degree, whatever it is, or I want to learn trade that is completely different from what they have in Nigeria. You could come back and establish something. So at that time, it was actually my uncle who proposed the idea to my mom, because he was bringing his own children at that time. So he said, if my mom wants, he could also take me along. And it was really a raw disagreement between my mom and my dad, because coming to abroad without a husband was something that it wasn't something that was practiced at that time. My father said, I'm not going to allow my daughter to go to America. That, she just graduated from high school. She's not married. It's not as if she's going to go and meet a husband there. He heard of many women going by themselves at that time, that they might end up becoming a prostitute and all that stuff. So my mom didn't relent, and she said, no, she has to go. And so that's how I came.
Hey, mommy.
So coming at that time, we Nigerians, everybody have their own cluster of countries community. You have the Nigerians, you have the Ghanaians, you have the Ethiopians, so most of the people who are actually from Nigeria, mostly Yoruba and Igbo. Or you see some Edo people.
Hausa people. Yeah.
I only met one Hausa man, and he wasn't even in school. He was just here to learn some trade and go back home. So, and that time, the moment you come in, people will ask you, have you done your GED? Because, to process the paperwork in terms of your high school paperwork in Nigeria was so, extensive, process you have to go through. So people will then ask you, have you taken your GED? You need to register for school. So we help each other at that time. And at that time, you know who is who. You know who have green card, who doesn't have green card.
Because way back in the 80s, I imagine that the relative strength of the naira to the dollar was stronger.
No, when I came here, $1 was equal to 50 kobo. So 1 naira will give you $2.
So naira, what the heck?
Naira was much more powerful. If you take Nigerian passports to the bank, that's good enough for your identification. They actually respect you and say, what do you want?
Whoa.
Nigerians were highly respected. At that time, we're not even thinking of going to stay back. Yeah. We're not staying back because everybody was, is either you are in medicine or accounting, banking, or you are in engineering. Those are the fields that you think, when you get back home, you're going to be able to achieve something. Or some people actually go for, fashion design, catering and all that stuff, So that was what most people were doing at that time. So By the time that I finished college, and after I even finished my undergraduate, I did banking and finance. I actually went to AIB, American Institute of Banking, with the hope that when I get to Nigeria, I'll be able to have a good job, working in a bank and with a finance degree at the back. And, by the time I finished, things were going down. I see that the dollars was rising through the structural adjustment program that, was implemented through this giant of World Bank at that time. So those are the issues, So people who were ahead of me that they went back home, they were all coming back. Many people were coming back and saying that things are changing. So
let's just pause for a minute here. Because, I grew up in the 80s, but towards the later 80s. And so even my consciousness about the economy was, as at that time, was almost non-existent. But of course, the older I got and the more I started learning more about history and economic development, I've heard this kind of tales about, how one time the dollar was, nothing compared to naira, and how even staying abroad was not even heard of. Even like your plane ticket, it was just not even like a big deal. People were good. So I guess this follow-up question is more like, what are some things from those days that you really, really miss? Because I imagine that you've seen almost like different timelines. And if you could weave those stories together, you could always tell, this is, the watershed moment. This is another watershed moment. If you could just draw 1-2 time points between then and now, what are some stark differences between then and now, or things that you miss the most about being a Nigerian here? And maybe things that you long for now, or things that you mourn, or the biggest losses as a Nigerian in the diaspora.
If you're talking about the experience here, when I initially came here, I missed the connection of the Nigerians at that time, of how close we were together, of the sense of the community that we had with each other at that time, looking out for each other, making sure everybody is okay, and it wasn't as if this one have more than the other. Everybody, no matter what, your educational level, no matter what class you are, everybody just pulled together because we feel like, okay, we're here, we're going back home. And no matter what, we need to pull together here to continue to connect, with each other. And then, we're going back home. But as everything become the issue of the idea that we are now staying here, a lot of things that were foreign to us, like the issue of race, become something that we have, we have to actually dig into to find out what does it mean to be Black in America. Because when we were here as a student in the 80s, in the early 80s, which the most important thing is to get our education and go back home. But then when you start interacting with the general public of the society, looking for the job in your field, then you see the whole issue that is actually going on in America. And being that as an immigrant, you only have immigrant experience. You don't have Black experience, because Black experience is historical. Black African American already understand the issue of race in this country. How to navigate through that system, what to do, how to, So as an immigrant, even in the early days, when somebody says something racist to you, sometimes you may not even know that it's racist.
I think it's just being rude, it takes a while.
Yeah, it's just being rude.
Your African American friend is looking at you like, that was them being racist. Like, was it?
Yeah.
Was it? I wake up at night, was it?
So you kind of look at it and or just overlook it and say, you know what, I this is not my country anyway. I'm going back to where I came from. So that aspect of is the missing link,
That's quite deep. Thanks for sharing that. That's quite deep. Let me tell a little bit on what you said, because by virtue of coming here for academic purposes, I came in a different bubble, because that was my mission, coming to get an advanced degree here. And I went to a school that was a bubble within a bubble. So I schooled in Austin, Texas. And if you know the geography of Texas, Austin is not like the rest of Texas. And within that bubble was UC Austin, which felt like another, micro universe, even though it's quite as large. What I say all of that to say, even in my interactions with other communities, because I had a lot of friends from different, walks of life and different parts of the world. The Indians had a way of doing things. The Koreans had a way of doing things. And as an outsider looking in, they all seem to be in harmony. And I used to yearn, let me give an example. Before I came here, it took me a while to be able to find accommodation. And for the grace of God, I probably have been stranded. But my Indian friends, they all had like a Facebook group where all the Indians coming to Austin, they knew themselves. They already sorted themselves out. There was nothing like for that for Nigerians that I knew of. It's just until recently we started building those kind of communities, right? I shout out to, Joanna, who's here. She's probably one of the people that started that Facebook group. And I say that to say, perhaps that factor you saw in the way we related to each other is that a reflection of just that loss, and also that sense of survival that comes with our status from going from a highly resourced economy to a low resource economy. Because you're an individual, but your country also tags along with you. Because that respect you said you had in the 80s, I imagine is not the same anymore. I could take my passport to the American bank. They're going to look at like, what is this? We don't recognize it. Some might not, So could that also be a reflection of like what we're seeing, how people are keeping to themselves, where we're no longer united here? When I say here, I mean Nigerians coming together compared to way back in the 80s. Is a reflection of just the state of our economy and just how people are just trying to survive day to day.
Yeah, you could see it that way, that people are trying to survive, but no matter what, like you just say, give example of the Indian community, of the new student who just came in and they already have the accommodation. They already help them to navigate through the system and say, okay, if you don't even have a place to stay, you could stay in this place for some time. And the same thing goes for the Asians as well. I'm talking about from China or Japan. So they have a very strong community like that. But for us, even though we're struggling, but we need to understand that we have to build that community. And that community is not even only among the Nigerians, because I would say among all the African groups, apart from Nigerians, the Ethiopians, Ghanaians, we came from English-speaking countries.
Yes.
And that have a privilege on its own compared to others who didn't come from those backgrounds.
Yeah.
So they came from. I hate to define us according to colonial.
I know, but it's just what it is. It's a broad categorization. Yeah.
But you have some who came from French-speaking countries. Those who came from Portuguese, Spanish-speaking countries. That when it comes to the whole idea of connection within this environment is much more challenging for them.
Yeah.
Than we came from English-speaking countries. Okay. So how can we build that community as one?
I see that. It's above and beyond just Nigerians, but
Nigeria, because nobody looks at you that many Americans still believe Africa is a country.
One long street of Kenya.
So sometimes, some don't even know Africa is over 1 billion people on the continent. Nigeria is over 200 million people in that country alone. So they don't see any difference.
Yeah.
All they see is all of you are Africans. And when you look at the Asians also in this country, they even the Latino, they do not divide themselves. Only when you go on among their communities that you see, you are from Mexico, you are from this, you are from that. But apart from that, everybody comes together when it comes to, advocating for their need and the rights of their community, because they know they speak with one voice.
That's true. And I think no better representation of that, especially during when the space of the Asian hate in New York, and they came out in one voice, finding ways to build their community up and keep themselves safe, so that way they were not going to be praised during those COVID attacks. Now these are really, really good thoughts. Thanks for sharing all of the thoughts now. So you didn't decide to stay, but you ended up staying here. How often do you go back to Nigeria? Let me just ask that.
Not too often. Not too often.
What's your relationship to Nigeria as a country? I know you're very Pan-African. There's no taking that away from you. And you're probably one of the not so many Nigerians that think just beyond Nigeria. Because I think Nigerians, I've come to this realization as a Nigerian. I'm very proud. I have these African, my supervisor in grad school, she's, African American Black. She calls me that I have this African superiority, which, we always laughed about, but I was always proud about it, but in that pride, I try not to be ignorant, but I know that some of us, we tend to think of Nigeria as just, there's Nigeria and everything else in Africa is others, right? But you're probably one of the many, not so many Nigerians that you think about just even relationships to other Africans and other Blacks, right? But let's start with Nigeria for now, because we're both Nigerians. What's your relationship with the country as a whole right now? How do you to Nigeria?
Well, I'm a very proud Nigerian. Not only Nigerian, I'm a very proud Yoruba woman. Okay, that pride is in me. And to me, one thing that I find out is that anywhere you go, you carry your culture with you, no matter where you are. I don't go to Nigeria too often because, first of all, both of my parents already passed. I have other extended family over there. We talk from time to time, those who you could connect with. And because also as a single parent, raising children in this country, to buy ticket to go to Nigeria when my children were growing up is, you're talking about spending about 5,000 and over.
Yeah.
To travel to Nigeria on one trip. So it wasn't something that...
That's just the triple, because you still have to buy...
So
everybody.
For me, because one thing, I'm a very realistic person who I'm not going to tell myself a lie when I know I cannot afford something I cannot afford. And what was much more important to me, where I want to spend money on, So for me, anywhere you go, you carry your culture along with you. I'm a Nigerian at heart. I'm a Nigerian advocating for other Nigerians. I'm a Nigerian advocating for other Africans, and talking about pulling everybody together. Because another thing that I see in many of us when we still focus on the idea that I need to go home every year, or I need to do all these things in order for me to say I'm connected with that place. And then living as a visitor. Or in the country that we're in, it actually pulled us away from being involved
and being in the
so
moment.
Many, conversations, so many issues that is going on, because we still have it at the back of our head that this is not, I'm just a visitor in this place. Even after living 20, 30 years. Some still think that they're going back home to retire back in Nigeria or their different respective African countries. But how actually visible is that?
Maybe it's just our way of those, because I won't lie to you. When I came here, I wanted to go back. I really wanted to go back. I had an exit plan, but my husband never wanted to go back. Like when I mean go back, like finally we settle back home, right? That's what I mean by going back. And every year I would visit home, that dream just kept becoming more of a mirage. Like I don't think it's ever going to happen. For the life I live here, and just the comfort and the ease of getting things done, and just the possibilities to do more things, and the way the country just keeps, Nigeria as a whole, keeps moving away from the hope that I have. So there's a grief in my heart that it might never be possible. So perhaps for those that are still thinking of going back home to retire, perhaps they're way of just holding on to something, like almost like this last vestige of hope. I don't want to let go of this identity, because if I give up hope of never going back home, then I'm going to be just an American, or maybe something to that effect. Maybe it's not feasible, but it still doesn't stop us from dreaming of a time where we can find a home to go back to. Because I feel like no matter how many years I spend here, I never feel comfortable here in the US now. How's that been for you? Do you really feel comfortable here? Is this here for you?
It depends, because as human beings, we're all connected with each other. And one thing that I realize is that you have to diversify your social circle. When we're talking about in Nigeria, when I first came to this country, in order to call Nigeria, you have to make sure that you save about $50 to be able to talk for 30 minutes. Now, social media has made that possible, that you don't even need to spend a dime to call anywhere in the world. You could call through your WhatsApp. You could, connect through different, social media forum that you are connected with. You're constantly connected with people back home. For me, anywhere that you are, it could be a home. And I'm not limiting myself to only people of my country or somebody who, or the only Yoruba community. I'm also including other people from different race, different cultural, ethnic background. Like you, I really admire, I've never seen any Nigerian who is, learning Korean language.
Yeah, quite a number of us. Thank you.
I'm so proud of it. So that is the connection that I will advocate. Okay, because like I said, anywhere that you are, you able to make a living.
Yeah.
You're living comfortably. Your safety is not being challenged.
Yeah.
Okay. You're able to go to work, get paid on time.
Yeah.
You feel safe. That place is also a home.
It is.
And your culture is what you carry within you and share it with others. When I talk to many people that are my friends from the Latino community, I could connect in their culture with my culture as well.
Yeah, yeah.
They are also part of African heritage.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
When you connect with other people from Asia, from even, many European countries, there's a connection right there. You find family along the way. Maybe they are not blood related, but they related to you by common interest.
Yeah.
Maybe through your work or through any other things that connect you. It might be through music. You like certain kind of music that, you integrate into that community. Those are also another form of family.
That's very true, ma. That's very true. I agree with you. And I think that on an individual level, yes, your culture is what you carry with you. Mm-hmm. But maybe for me and maybe for others like me who still find it very hard to harmonize those two parts, it's because we still have so many vested interests back home. By vested interests, I still have family members back home. Mm-hmm. And every now and then when bad things happen, like we had a loss in the family not so long ago, it just you back to reality. And you realize that even with technology, grieving in a communal setting is quite limited. When you think about the hardships of people back home, anytime you visit, and you just want a time where you want to gather all of the precious ones together and just be under the safe, whatever safety means. And so maybe it's just the connection I feel, the direct connection, and the fact that every time I see a missed call from anybody back home, I get worried like, what's going on? Is there something bad going on? But, wherever we are, we can make life happen, right? Mm-hmm. And I pray that there'll be a time where we won't feel like we're stuck in a place and try to force life happening for us. But a lot of us can have that fluidity. Because I imagine that for so many Nigerians or even Africans abroad, they can't even go home, even if they wanted to, for so many reasons, immigration status, or just so many things. And that's just my fear. That's my hope that someday we would have that fluidity. Wherever you want to make home for yourself, you're not being forced to stay or forced to leave. You find that, home for you. Mm-hmm. Now, yeah. Sorry, go ahead, ma.
Yeah, and that's what you say is just so important. Anywhere you are, we're all worried about what is going on in Nigeria. Worried about our family member, if somebody passed away. And also, we have to think about our own life here. Imagine if you're a parent, you worrying about the people back home. How can I send money? Of course, to make ends meet. Many of us who are in foreign countries are the major supplier of income for so many people back home.
Oh, yeah. We contribute to the economy.
To help boost the economy.
Yes.
But then you also have to think about your welfare here, especially when you're raising children.
Mommy, this table you're on, we need to come back and bring you to talk about black tax. This table you're shaking. This table you're shaking, man. We don't have the time. We need to bring you back to talk about black tax.
I just want to make a point. I want to make a point because we're sending money home regularly. But there's also the impact of that has with a lot of us here. Imagine many of us who wants to build a house back in Nigeria or in different part of Africa. And then we work in 2-3 jobs and we have children in this country. But in America, it takes much more when you are raising your children that you have to be available. So if I have to work 2-3 jobs to be able to pay for whatever material wealth that I'm trying to build back home, what time do I have with my children? Or thinking about buying ticket regularly to go back home.
And with that house built, how many people have donated money back or sent money back home to build the house? 20 years ago they go back, there's no house, there's not even a foundation.
No, some actually have I'm so surprised that some who have a house that they said they cannot even stay in that house when they go home. They go and stay in a hotel.
Why?
Because they don't feel safe.
Wow.
They rather stay in a hotel.
That's very sad. That's a very sad story. Right there.
Yeah.
That's a very sad story right there.
Yeah.
Security reasons, yeah. Well, we're going to move on talking about our relationship with African Americans, but I would like to take a pause right now to acknowledge our listeners in the studio. Joanna Omomi Afolabi, my mother in New York. I have a mom in New York, which is Olashakon. Hello. And OS, I don't know who OS is, but thank you so much for joining. Now, let's move on to our relationships. And please, for our listeners, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll prioritize your questions over my questions because you are, very important to us. And thank you for joining. Now, let's talk about this social distance. And I didn't mean to, sound frivolous when I did this. Our social distance between Africans and African Americans, right? For a very long time, especially during the 20th century, during the Jim Crow era, African Americans were encouraged to actually shun the idea of connection to Africa, right? To think poorly of Africa, even the images, I had somebody on the show, I'm here to release the episode. She grew up, she's 60 now. She said she was exposed to National Geographic, and the images of Africa was, that classic one of the fly, following the little child about with the protruding stomach, right? So African Americans were encouraged to show the idea of a connection to Africa, to celebrate the traits in themselves, which also distance them, from Africa. So they were supposed to be more cultured, more white, more civilized, and therefore to look at Africanness, as a matter of shame or something that needed to be avoided like a plague. And so, but I read it somewhere, and I forget where I read it, who said this, but they said something around the lines of the African Americans, they've been subjected to what you call denaturing, where, they were forced into that period of slavery, and in the pro-slavery era, put Africa behind you, erase all of the memories of Africans. And as a result, you find that many Black Americans, they remain very skeptical of, the potency or even the relevance of a paradigm that almost like situates their identity outside of America. Because like you were talking about safety, when they even think about Africa as a motherland or where they're from, wherever their genetic blueprint is from, they have no connection to it. Because to them, it's like this strange land. And you see that expressed either in, and I think it goes both ways. Don't get me wrong. I think we as Africans, we have a lot we need to work on ourselves. So when it comes to relating to African Americans, right? So we can look at those both sides of the coin. And I imagine that a trickle-down effect of that is what we see in other countries, like the xenophobia going on in South Africa, for example. How do we build this bridge, Ma? And how has it been like for you? Especially growing up in the 80s and even moving to the US, you've probably seen different, waves and different movements come and go. How have you been able to thrive in a place like New York, which I think is a hodgepodge of culture in the world? It's a paradigm right there. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, relationship with African Americans is like you said, the impact of the history have a lot to do with it. Because and I want to also bring you to, anytime we talk about the relationship with African American, we don't talk about relationship with
other Africans
from the Caribbeans.
Okay,
who felt like they are left out of the conversation, as if they have no connection with Africa. You have a conversation with people from Brazil. Okay, Africans in Brazil who felt they are disconnected, that they are not part of this conversation. And they also in this country. Because when you go back through the history of civil rights movement, there's so many so many children of immigrants from the Caribbean who also participated in civil rights movement.
Yes.
And at that time, too, you have some Africans who also migrated in the 50s, who also participated in the civil rights movement. If you don't know Babatunde Olatunji, the famous drummer, who participated. And, there were so many like that. So the image that was shown in the beginning, and I'm also going to talk about South American as well. Those from the South American, from different countries in South America, like Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans, and all these other people, they also part of African history. People of African descent. So we have to also talk about those groups as well. So we don't focus only on African Americans.
Okay.
So the impact of what the European has done, they did their own work very well. Okay, in bringing divide and conquer is like having a household, take the most able body of that household member and put some of them in America, the Europe, deposited them in the Caribbean and all these other places, and then continue to control and divide Africa.
Still dead.
And another thing that I do storytelling, traditional Yoruba storytelling. And before I do the storytelling, I have the map of Africa before colonization, map of Africa during colonization, which European countries went to create. Okay, and then where we are now, how divided those countries are. So imagine those history from the beginning, and how Europeans in themselves have impact in kinds of education that is being poured down on our heads all over the world. So a lot of all this division has taken place where it is so much that we have to work on. When initially for me, like I said before, bringing the conversation down to individual, when I first came in here, I didn't know what it is to be Black in America because I don't have Black experience in this country. I only have immigrant experience. Immigrant experience is your culture, your language, and everything that you brought in. And the idea that I'm just here to do what I have to do and keep moving until, when you start, integrating into the society, integrating into the community, and then you find out that you're actually Black. There's when I held the community conversation the other time, I was asking people, when do you know that you're actually Black? When did you become Black in America? So for me, the relationship within people of African descent is touch and go sometimes. There's some who will accept you, and there's some who will not accept you. I've tried as much as possible. Many of us who have the opportunity to go to college, we might have taken classes in Black studies. That's which is not compulsory, is a part of, is not a compulsory class for you to take. Okay, it's optional if you have to take any class in Black studies. So apart from me taking classes when I was doing my undergraduate in Black studies, I even went as far as educating myself about the life of Black people in this country, about the life of people of color in this country. What was their experience like? What is it that they still continue to struggle with? And how can I navigate through that system? So from the beginning, I have a relationship with many African Americans who are friends. Many people from the Caribbean who are my friends. Many people from Latin America who are my friends. So I have, pocket of people from different places. And we're able to share a commonality in terms of we're people of color in this country and appreciate our differences. Like you were saying that we Africans too, we have our own biases. Everybody have biases. There's nobody that doesn't have biases, even among the Nigerians. Among the Africans. It's a human experience. I might be, even among the Yoruba, I might come from Lagos and look at the people from Ibadan as something,
Even within families, we have that.
So, but if you're, and we understand the issue of institutionalized racism, where it's so difficult to do too much, and in the masses, everybody continue to fight against institutionalized racism in school, in jobs, in healthcare, name it. But then as an African, we're not just fighting against the institutional of racism and our color as being Black. We also fighting against the identity. As a person of immigrant, somebody with an accent. Like I told somebody said, "Oh, you've been here for over 40 years. You still have the accent." I said,
"Everybody has it."
You're telling me I should change my identity. That is what defines me for who I am. It's like you telling me I should deny everything that makes me to be who I am today. Have you ever told somebody from Europe that they need to change their accent who speaks, British English? Or somebody from of Portuguese heritage or somebody from Australia to change their accent? So a lot of all those biases is what we have against one another. And when your biases now affecting people's way of life, and now it's time to talk about it. Because I'm not just dealing with the issue of race, I'm also being discriminated against because I'm a woman of color, because I'm a woman of different heritage, different ethnic group, or I'm a woman who is maybe Muslim because of my religion, or for so many reasons. So as, we advise many of us who are here who have the opportunity to understand the struggle of people of color. I'm not just going to talk about only African Americans,
but other Caribbean,
other people of color. Our history globally of our struggle, to understand what we are actually, the experience of our heritage, and then how can we move on together? To educate ourselves on that. But, you can only build relationship with people who open hand to build relationship with you. You'll find African Americans who are willing to, open hand with you, and you could do the same. And you'll find people from the Caribbean who acknowledge, you see you, and they accept you, and you two, you accept each other, you respect one another. So, but a lot of time you cannot force relationship that is not there.
Yeah. For
some people, because you have another organization brewing up who already make themselves popular among African American community called ADOS, African Descendant of Slaves or something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Who are on the social media on a war torn towards many immigrants of color, especially the Africans. So we have to talk about that. What impacts do that have when it comes to many of our children who are on college campuses or applying for jobs, or even within the community whereby, many of us are immigrants. We live mostly in the community where many of members of the community are also people of color from the Caribbean, from South America, from all these different places. What are the challenges that we are going through as African in this community of color? You have many African immigrants who are non-speaking from non-speaking countries who does not speak English, and they're so scared to go to schools to advocate for their children. Because of the school is not actually with open hands to accept them in, to say, willing to reach out to their community and say, you could come in anytime, we open our door to you, what services can we provide your community? So we have a lot of all those issues.
Thanks for that reminder. I think even not just focusing on African Americans, but also other people of color, because we're all in this together, right? And there's that sense of otherness that borders into our lived experiences. And as long as we are away from wherever we call home, we need to come together because there's safety in numbers. And I think the challenge for me is also to keep including them in those conversations, because for so long I've just been focused really on African Americans, because that was just the biggest challenge for me. But I think even extending that conversation to other people of color, I think that's the challenge it's giving me today. And I thank you for that reminder.
Thank you.
So let's talk about raising kids in America, right? Which I know you have 2 kids. Congratulations on that. And let me start by contrasting this with African Americans, here, right? We know that overwhelming majority of Black Americans here are probably like 6 or 7 generations culturally removed from Africa, right? And I see the impact of you being a Nigerian immigrant to the U.S. Your children, I don't know, I imagine that they're probably maybe quite as strong, even stronger as you are when it comes to, because I imagine the kind of person you are, you build them up in such a way that they know that this is home, Africa is home as well. And they know their history, they know who they are, they know their identity. But that probably took a lot, and I don't think many people have that kind of luxury. My fear is that we might come to a point where the more we stay here, we might have people who might not even speak any of our languages. Heck, we're even hearing some reports about how some languages, especially in the Igbo community, are becoming almost extinct because you're having the speakers dying off, right? Even the religious beliefs, our practices, our foods, marital and family structures, they might be so far removed away from the motherland, right? How have you been able to maintain that identity within your kids? And why was it so important for you to do that if you did?
Well, for me, even though sometimes I'm going to take you back to Nigeria. When we were growing up in Nigeria, in school, they would say, don't speak vernacular. Okay, don't speak your language.
Yeah, vernacular, you get points.
Yeah, you get points, you speak English, So we have to think about how that have an impact in so many of us who came to this country. Even when I came to this country, I didn't have my children until maybe 12 years later. So that's another thing that actually allowed me to actually integrate as a single person very well in this country, compared to so many people that when they came to this country, immediately they might have their children within few years, maybe within 2 years, or they actually brought those children from home. And they're coming from a country that promotes a vernacular, it promotes English or French. You even have some Africans that they came from French-speaking country that they will say, "Oh, I'm French."
Yes, yeah.
They identify themselves as being French instead of calling
African,
themselves according to which African country they came from. So we have to think about that, because even as I have my children, many who have had their children before, they blaming themselves and saying, why I should have been speaking the language to my children from the on-go. But for my children, they understand the language, but they don't speak it. Because like you said, it is so much to battle with in this country. When you're raising children, all your ears, eyes, everything has to be open. But one thing that I did when they were in school was to bring in the African culture into the school. So during the Black History Month, every year, I used to do storytelling, the traditional Yoruba storytelling. And, I brought in the culture. We introduced African dance class into the school, for after school program. The school allowed that. And it's because I didn't pull myself back and say, oh, I don't think, they might not allow it. And, I know I have to invest my time also into that. Like I told somebody, I wasn't a storyteller before I became a storyteller. I was buying books on the Yoruba folk tale, which brought back so many stories that we were here, we listened to when we were growing up, the turtle and the lion and all these others, so you memorize it, and I go into the classroom and, present it into the classroom. So, like I said, it's every day of what we do with our children. Because it's not only about the language, it's also about teaching the culture. And culture and language also intermingle together. So it's about bringing that into our household. And in this country, I must have mentioned it before, raising children demands your full attention.
Yep. especially as a Black person.
Yes. Even with white people, raising children demand your full attention, because it's not only about your children. You're living in a nice neighborhood, so they might not get into trouble. You have a nice house and all that stuff. That's not even the whole point behind it, because you have to invest time with your children. You have to invest money on your children. So it's not something easy in this country. We cannot use the same kind of way we were raised back home to raise the children in this country.
Because I feel like even the society is not very well, it's not family oriented here. Mm-hmm. It's not.
And you could teach your culture, like I always say to people, you could teach your culture. Your culture is within your household. The next door person, the next door person has a completely different culture from you. Okay, and then when they go to school, they have to battle with so much of different value system from people from different places.
Which might sometimes be you might be conflicting against what you're teaching them at home.
What you're teaching them at home. So what do you have to do then? Okay, now, when my kids were growing up, social media wasn't that much. Okay, now you have to deal with the global culture that is seeping through the social media with your children. So you see how demanding it is.
There's a virtual world, there's a physical world, there's also the metaphysical world coming out with this meta and the AI and whatnot.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Can I do 2 jobs and be able to, appropriately be in the life of these children? No. Okay, so you have to take what is much more important. Okay, is it about building a house back home? Okay, or I go and buy a house I cannot afford, whereby I have to do double shift or triple shift in order to pay for those mortgage, rather than me staying in a more affordable place so that I could take care and be in the life of these children.
Oh, wow. I mean, so I have a daughter now, right? And we've been trying to teach her Yoruba. We made a rule that we're only going to speak Yoruba at home. Have you been able to follow it? No. Because growing up in Lagos, I grew up in Lagos for a human. Even if you're not speaking Yoruba so much at home, the playground, the school you go to, your interactions at church, with friends, like that concept of taking a whole village to raise a child, it was literal. But here it's like, if you don't do all that kind of work, but what's the time? So I've contended in my heart, like, even if she picks a few words, and I raise a well-adjusted member of the society. Yeah. The language, I mean, my parents didn't grow up teaching me Korean. I found the language myself. Maybe Yoruba might not be her thing, but I've stopped stressing myself out because it's not quite as easy as I thought it was going to be.
It's not. Because like I said, it takes back home, it takes a whole community to raise children, like you just said. There's somebody, even in Lagos, you might have somebody of Igbo heritage living next door to you. You might have somebody of Hausa heritage living next door to you. But the culture is quite similar, in some ways. So you could enforce the language and everything. But there's some family who are actually able to do that. And how they're able to do that, because especially Africans who came from French-speaking countries, their children actually do speak and understand the language, because in many ways they have to be the one to translate for their parents. Yes.
And even to their parents' English when the time comes,
Yes. So that is doable among those communities. It's something that it could be done, but it takes a lot of effort to be able to do that. But even now in Brazil, they actually have Yoruba as a, I think it's a second language in that country.
I think Brazil definitely has, outside of Lagos, outside of Nigeria, it has the second largest of constitution of Yoruba. Because I know, with the transatlantic slave route, Definitely a lot of them. I think they even have like it's a religion and a culture too.
Yeah, they have Ifa Institute or something like that. And they're actually challenging that Yoruba is not as polished as theirs because they carry the original ones with them when they were living.
They need to calm down with that. This is where I'm going to draw the line. We'll find Daniel's dollar price.
Yeah, they're saying that Yoruba. I actually went to an African film festival where I met somebody from Brazil, and he said Yoruba is not as polished as theirs.
Because they took them away from us. So how can they be more than us? We like that they keep, the culture going on, but they should calm down, okay? They should calm down. They should calm down. I'm going to take some questions that were sent in by some of our listeners beforehand. So this is from Jessica and Amoni, and they wanted to ask about your experience with racism. So the first question was, have you experienced subtle or overt racism? In my mind, I'm like, who hasn't? And if you have, how has it changed over time?
I have. I could write a book.
Especially in New York.
I could write a book of my experience with racism. You want to talk about with the white or the blacks? Okay, or the other people of color. I could write a book on it.
Which one pains you the most? I think the black one pains me the most.
My everyday contact is mostly with people of color. But like I said, the institution in itself, okay, institutionalized racism is right there, whereby, it could be a limited access to resources that is being everybody of color do experience. But in everyday challenges of biases and aggression comes from other people of color. So initially it was something that I used to get upset about, but as time goes on, it becomes something that I just have to have a plan, answer in my head. Okay, if some kind of way to actually deal with it, where it doesn't even penetrate to me anymore. Because you come in with those biases, I will answer you and I go about with my business.
Give it to
you give it to me. I'll give.
I want to be more like Silva, to be able to respond immediately and just move on.
Because it's something that you've experienced many times. Like I told when I was at the other podcast, I was talking to Nancy, and she said, "What was the worst thing that ever happened to me?" I said, "There's so many." But one that came to my head was somebody asking me if, how does it feel to live in a mud house? And I said, oh, mud house.
At this time and age?
No.
I said, at this time and age?
Yeah, that was about 15 years ago. I said, mud house. Actually, mud house is luxury for the royal family, the kings and the queens and all those people. I said, we're actually living in trees. We live in trees. The mother will take one tree, the father will take one tree, and we hop from one tree to another.
You did it.
And I kept walking. I kept walking because what would you answer to that? Am I going to get upset because of that?
You can't fix that kind of ignorance.
I can't fix that kind of ignorance. I can't.
I mean, this is what year was it? Was it 1980 something?
In the early mid-90s.
Okay. Maybe we can say
whereby you could easily pick up things to read and, understand. But people will just want to put you down, or you're talking, I don't understand what you're saying. I said, do you want me to spell it out if you can read? Okay, I will spell it out for you. So you want me to put it in writing? So you will come with different things that people will say to you. And for someone to continue to keep your own image and your identity is a way for me to also connect with new immigrants who are coming in. So because I don't want to sound differently from the new immigrants who are coming in.
For sure.
To say that, we're all in this together.
So you're like a time capsule in a way. archiving the process as we go on.
Yeah, that I would say that, so, and it is so much that you have to go, whether, going to advocate for your children in school and somebody who can't pronounce your name. I've had a situation whereby, I was complaining about a teacher in my son's school, and the person I was complaining to is actually biracial. She cannot even pronounce my name.
Seriki or Kemi, which part of it?
Yeah, Oluwa Kemi. I heard, and then the person I was complaining about is actually a European person, and I couldn't call his name either. So she said, that's how you pronounce his name. I said, I'm glad you could pronounce that name better. You know who I'm talking about. So let's talk now. So,
I love your style. I so love your style.
Well, should I put myself and start going and file for biases, races? I don't have time for that. Because if you give it to me, I'll give it back to you. So the moment I give it back to you, I feel better and I keep moving.
Yeah, moving on. Yeah.
You keep moving on, because if not, you would find out you just keep, with the same battle over and over and over again. And as long as you know who you are on the inside, you carry yourself with that pride of who you are on the inside.
Okay. I had just one more question. Again, if you are in the room right now and you'd like to ask some questions, please use the chat function, or you can unmute if you have questions. So how do you balance? I think we kind of answered this, but I'm going to ask you. This is also from Jessica on the moment. They want to know, how do you balance the being present in the happenings of where you live right now in New York and staying connected to the happenings in your original home? As you know, the elections are coming up in a week's time in Nigeria. And with the currency change, the hyperinflation, the hardships, how do you balance those two things? Because I imagine New York is not even a walk in the park as well.
Well, I don't get involved too much in Nigerian politics.
Why?
I don't, because one thing that I've realized, even with people who are actually talking about issue of Nigerian politics here, is much more of personal feelings, not too much of actually attaching the issue that we have in that country that is going on: poverty, lack of adequate services for children. What is our next generation of children will be in another 20, 30 years from now?
Tribalism.
People are not talking about, they are not talking about that. They are talking, like you said, tribalism. People are not, you are not actually having conversation that has to do with the issue. You're having conversation that has to do with personality of the person.
Who personalized the help?
So for me, I don't engage myself in those kind of conversation because it's not productive. Whether is this person is going to be the president, what is the other one that is leaving or left, or generations, during the time of Muritala Mohammed, and all these other people, Gowon, all those people, the military rules and all that, all those people who ruled the continent, the country at that time. What has changed from that time to this time? You have many of Nigerian reporters, the newspaper, whatever you want to call it, the media, they are not writing on that mindset to talk about the issue, everyday life difficulty, lack of safety in this country. So when when it comes to, we're just going to talk about the person, I don't even know who are contesting because it's not part of what I'm interested in. But people are not really digging into the issue.
Issues. Okay, politics aside, how about just the happenings, like the hardships and maybe some other aspects of the country? How do you stay balanced between those two things? Like
what?
Just maybe day-to-day living. So right now, the new Naira note is scarce in circulation, and you're seeing people marking up the prices to pay Naira for Naira. We have issues with inflation, hyperinflation, which has been sustained from COVID. that has also caused a lot of, household goods to skyrocket. We have issues with, petrol prices going up. We have issues with, kidnappings and, and then.
I keep up with a lot of all those issues. I read about them. I keep up with a lot of all those issues. The people I could discuss it with, I am able to discuss it with, so I keep up with all those things, of social inequality, of the educational system in Nigeria in itself. The younger generation who are in university, the lack of opportunity for them, many doctors who are leaving Nigeria in number, in droves, coming abroad, going to places like Saudi Arabia to practice over there instead of staying in that country. So it's a lot of all those issues that we need to talk about. You have many, if you in New York here, when you look at how many, the population of people of color in medicine, a lot of them are Nigerians.
Yeah.
A lot of them are in medicine. A lot of them are Nigerians. You have Nigerians in every aspect of any way you want to tap into. So is our children who were born here or brought here at a very young age, who are contributing immensely in this country. Because Nigeria, that country is not seeing the talent that they're producing. And instead of making the country to be able to accommodate the population and serve the people and think about the welfare of people are only thinking about their pocket.
Yeah.
We've come from a country where materialistic aspect of life is much more important. Who of the name of who is who, okay? When you come from a nation where material things is much more important than individual. There's a Yoruba saying in the olden days, people don't use that anymore. They say, Ashonla kole yonla.
Big clothes is not a big person. It doesn't make you a big person.
Just because you wear, quality attire does not mean that you are rich.
Quality person, yeah.
You are somebody that warrants respect.
Substance, yeah.
But now, even if the person is stealing or he stole the money or he found the money in any way that we could think about, they empower the person without questioning the resources, without even questioning the humanity of that person. Okay, as an individual, what have you done to, the society? What good have you done for the society? One thing I see in America here, no matter how much money you have, one thing, even with their government, they always push for people to give back. You claim it in your taxes.
It's good. I was about to say, for tax purposes, they make the people very philanthropic.
Yeah, you understand me? So you put those money there to help other people.
It's fiscally
encouraged. To actually encourage it. But in our society, where we came from, it's completely different. People have the money as a source to oppress other people. To look at how many, before they wake up in the morning, how many 30 people are waiting for them so that they could give few nairas to them, every day. It makes them feel good and important about themselves. Those are the people we need to be, bringing into the open forum.
Talk about stuff, yeah.
And talk about all these problems, and actually empower and embrace those actually who are giving back, who are making sure the life of an individual, is better. So that's what it is. I keep referring because, I would say practically all my adult life is spent in America. When you look at this society, you could go to Harvard, you could go to Yale, you could go to Oxford. Okay, fine. People do that every day. But what contribution are you making? Yeah. How are you using your expertise to change people's life? If you have a PhD, if you're a professor, how many papers have you written to impact other people's life? That's how they push the society to connect with the generation. They're already thinking about what is going to happen 50 years from now. Is that thinking available in our society? And that's why we have so many university graduates who can't find jobs. with this lifespan in Nigeria is so short. People are dying at a very young age. You're in your 50s, 60 years old. That's how life begins in another part of the world. You're losing people for ordinary common ailment that could be easily cured. So we talk. Then you're talking about some government who are all these corrupt politicians who are coming in. The only thing they think about is how they're going to build houses in all over the world, all abroad. Then you have some of our people who are buying houses on Central Park around here in New York City, and they don't even live there. They just use the money to buy property. Yep. And also the same thing in England. So what is it that we as a society we're doing? So that's why I don't really involve myself in so much of conversation regarding.
Makes sense. But you're still having those conversations and doing stuff. You're more of the doing than just having empty conversations around it.
Yes.
Yeah. I said it was my last question, but this is my last question, I promise. For those of us that are here, those of us that are planning to come here, or maybe even leaving the motherland and wherever we might find ourselves outside of Africa or, other colors, other nations of color, look at me being inclusive. How have you been able to do that emotional support for yourself? And what are some ways to thrive when you're away from, your original home? And that's my first question. The second one will be talking about your Pánsá Pánsá Forum and where people can find you and your work.
Okay. So that, when you are abroad, I always preach to people, diversify your circle, find out what you can, get into, there's so many of us who still believe, you have to go to university and everything. Not everybody has to go to university. There's some of us who could go and learn trade, who could develop your own business. You don't have to have a college degree in order to make ends meet, So just try to live a decent life and connect with people, connect with other people, not only your own people alone, but connect with other people from different places. Because you will always find help. You always find humanity in other people, that they are not from your background. They are not from your heritage. And that's how you expose yourself also to so many opportunities that you might not know. So that's what I would say. So for my Pánsá Pánsá, people could actually find me. My website is pansapansa.org. How do I come up with the name of Pánsá Pánsá? Actually, the name I originally chose for this my project was Irekerindo. Journey back and forth.
Wait, Pánsá Pánsá, it's sort of like almost like when you're reading a poem or telling a story, the pauses in between. Is that it? Like when you're telling a story or saying a poem, like the pauses in between.
You mean Pánsá Pánsá?
Pánsá Pánsá, yeah.
Pánsá Pánsá is actually, is a word that indicate that I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear.
Like
I'm going to have an uncomfortable conversation with you. Some people will say, it's not called Pánsá Pánsá, it's Pánsá Pánsá. I said, well, everybody have their own pronunciation. That's why, when people from Ondo say something, they might say it with different tonation. When people from Oyo say something, it might be different. And then the people in Lagos may say something that it might be different at the same time. So the accent is, but the dialect might differ. So, but I changed it. I was in the gym one time and I was listening to Fela. I was listening to Pánsá Pánsá. I said, you know what, this name fits. I'll call it Pánsá Pánsá. Because it's an uncomfortable talk. It's an uncomfortable conversation. So I blog about so many issues of African immigrants abroad. I review books written by some of our children, which I hope some of us may pick up sometimes to read about immigrant experience as well as our children's experience in this country. One of the last one that I did is written by a young Nigerian. I forgot her name. No. Achebe, yeah, I did that. He actually, it's called, I think I'm lying, but I'm telling the truth. Basikipi. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. She, I read the book and I was so moved by the book because she focused on her experience growing up with her parents and the mental health challenges that she faced growing up with her parents. So I read books like that. There's so many other things that I do on the podcast as well, interviewing African immigrants, first generation and second generation. And the reason why I actually came up with this open forum is the idea that many of our children who were born in this country, about the challenges that they face, and the lack of connection between parents and the children in this country. Because as an African, you could only raise your children with your immigrant experience, with your culture and your heritage.
And you're also learning through it. So it's not,
you are learning too. Yeah. So what about raising them as a child of color in this country? So it is a lot of challenges for so many immigrants. So that's why I came up with, the forum. Initially, it was done within the community where I usually gather many of our children together from different background, from different countries, and they talk about their experiences in the presence of parents. And those parents who were there, they really learn a lot. I've had a situation of a young lady talking about her experience growing up in her home and many of the challenges that she faced growing up within that home. And the mother was part of the audience. Both the mom and the daughter were both crying, have to address the issue to find out how can we find them help that is needed, maybe, refer them for therapy and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, that's what brought all this conversation up, for me to go into, continue to do it. And during the COVID, when COVID happened, that I couldn't, do it within the community, the idea of podcast came into play. And I said, okay, let me just see what I can do with that. I was actually talking to one of the young men I'm going to introduce to you later.
Oh, yeah. Dr. Kelechi? Okay.
And it's so funny how I met him, So it is so funny. I love podcasts. I listen to so many podcasts. So I was listening to podcasts and his podcast came into suggestion. So I listened to it and I listened to all his episodes. Didn't know that a Nigerian parent is listening to his podcast. So there was a time he was having a conversation about African parents and their relationship with their children. And he gathered, his fellows together and they were talking about different issues that they experiencing as a young generation, first and second generation. So I listened to it and there's certain things that I didn't agree from what they were saying. So I sent him email. And I said, yeah, let's have a talk about this, of what you guys are talking about. I said, yeah, I would love to have parents to have their own conversation and see what we can exchange with each other. So it was from there that I started the podcast. So people could follow me, listen to podcasts, let me know what you think about it, share it with others, because it's a work of passion for me. I have no sponsor. It's something that I personally do by myself, So it's one thing that I said, with my, resources or whatever, I could put into this podcast as well as the blog as well.
Yeah. So one tell bit of that would be, some people that might be here, and I think even listen to this podcast on, I've had conversations with some of my friends who moved to other countries like UK, Canada, US, and who are parents, and they're quite worried just about, especially when they take their kids who maybe started growing up in Nigeria at a tender age, and they're in this new country, and the children keep asking questions like, oh, for example, if Nigeria is that bad, how come, our family members are still there? And there's also that guilt of taking your child away from because whenever you make that move, usually it's for your children. You think about their future. You want to make that sacrifice for them. Perhaps they're still too young to understand the scope and the breadth of that sacrifice. For moms and dads are like in that category, who are kind of worried about, how do I make this a worthy investment? I hope I haven't made a mistake, taking my child away from Nigeria or whatever African country or other, countries of color to this, place that has better economic prospects. What kind of encouraging words do you have for them? Because it seems like you've been able to do it quite successfully.
Well, I'm still trying, because even though, someone will continue to try on that. To me, anywhere you are, your children has to be with you. Anywhere you are, your children has to be with you. Because I've seen some of our people whereby they feel like, oh, okay, I need to, just like we've been saying, my children have to know where they come from. They have to understand the culture and everything. Then you go and put them in Nigeria or any other countries you come from, thinking that, oh, they're learning culture and everything. To me, it's not a good advice. Because Yoruba have a saying, you cannot see.
Your eyes cannot, I cannot see with another person's eyes.
Yes, you cannot see through other people's lenses.
Yeah.
It has to be through yours. So nobody will be able to care for your child the same way you are going to care for your child. And I've seen situations of many of, actually, if you could Google it in, I don't know whether I wrote about it on my blog too, and I interviewed one woman who is a Nigerian. This is another completely different story.
The twin, Taiwo?
The twins, Taiwo.
Yeah, two was, in the UK,
In UK, where, the many Africans, I won't even say Africans, Nigerians and the Ghanaians, that they put their children in with white family to be raised in rural area while they're busy working.
I read it, I did that,
It's such a sad, they call it farm out, So to me, anywhere you are, even though you may be struggling in the country where you are, have your children with you. Let them know, let them see that you are all struggling together. Because when they grow up, when they get older, and you try to build that relationship with them, it may be difficult. Because I've seen so many families that they took their children back home and those children came back and they never talked to the parents again. Because they felt the trauma, they felt that the parents abandoned them. That if you're struggling, let us all struggle together. I understand, that my parents are struggling because we're not the only ones struggling. When you look at the African American community or any other immigrant, even, other people from Europe who just came to this country, they struggle with their family, with their children. And, they have to witness what it builds character in them to understand their parents went through all these things and they're able to make ends meet and provide the best they could do for them. But when you put them back in that country, in any way you want to have your children being taken care of by another person, when they come back, it may be detrimental to the relationship that you want to have with them. Because there's so many who feel abandoned.
I think you're right. Wherever you are, your kids to be, and
they should.
That's just the bottom line. Everything else will sort itself out.
It will sort itself. Even if you're staying in a room, let them stay in a room with you. Because they see an example of somebody struggling and making ends meet. Let them stay in that room with you. And that's why the idea that, I need to do extra thing back home. Let me do 2 jobs so that I could acquire all this property in Nigeria, and, so that when I get older, I have a place to stay. Who knows where you're going to end up when you get older? Does the country you are pouring your resources on have the adequate health care that will take care of you when you get older? Okay? So you have to think about all those things.
Thank you.
Because I've one last thing, I years ago, I came across a Nigerian young lady who was telling me about her story. And I was so proud. I said, wow, look at you. You're so beautiful in Nigeria. She said she's doing her master's and she wants to go into her PhD. I said, oh my God, your parents must be proud of you. She said, my mother died years ago. I said, wow, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I said, what about your dad? She said, oh, he too died, a couple of years after my mother died. He said, but I didn't see my parents enjoy their what they suffer for, what they work for. I didn't see them enjoying it. She said, because my father, anytime he has a vacation in this country, he goes to Nigeria. Mm-hmm. He built a big mansion in their village. And the parents only have 2 children. And he built a mansion. So after the father, like I said, every year, like she told me, he goes to Nigeria. So he died here, but according to his will, they have to go and bury him back home. So they have to ship his body back to Nigeria to bury him.
And that's not
in the house that he built. The 2 children that he has, none of them are going home.
That is sad.
So who eventually owned that house? So we have to think about that.
Wow, you've definitely started a lot of thoughts to ponder. I could just keep talking on and on with you because you have just this deep well of knowledge. And I know this is not going to be your first or last time on the podcast. We have to keep these conversations going in different aspects of it and finding ways to keep harmonizing our communities and other communities as well. But I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for just the ease in talking to you, for your knowledge, for your wisdom, for not holding back. I'm very thankful. I think for me, what I'm living with so many things, but definitely there are considerations for creating room and space for other colors of other communities and including them in the narrative and keep thinking of ways of making my neighbor a better place, making myself a better person, because that also reflects on how I serve my community, right? And not just talking, but actually doing. In everything I do, how am I serving others? Like, how can I be of service? That's what I'm gonna leave from our conversation today. And I want to thank you so much, Ma, for your time and everything, and just who you are and your person, everything you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too, because I'm learning from you. We all learn from each other, so we all, one hand has to watch the other. We are learning from each other, so we have to continue. And, next time, maybe, we could have this conversation where other people could also be involved.
I agree. Oh, we have some comments coming from the chat. So OS Aramde wants to say thank you so much, Ma. As an immigrant mom, this was a great session. We'll keep paying attention. Thank you, Lamde, for that comment. Yeah. All right, everyone. This has been a production from the Most Sibyl podcast. We're sure you like topics like this. Let us know how best we can keep serving you. And Mrs. Seriki is on Instagram. I'm going to tag all of her handle on the episode for this, as well as on the Facebook page. But her website is pansapansa.org. Right, Ma?
Yeah.
And just even if you Google Pánsá Pánsá platform or podcast, it shows on there. All right, everyone, stay safe and love you guys. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Most Sibyl podcast. Well, guess what? There's plenty more where that came from. So visit our website at www.mosibyl.com. That is www.mosibyl.com.
where you can find hours of other binge-worthy episodes just like this one. And while you're at it, please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Podbean, as it encourages other awesome people like you to listen to the podcast as well. We are now officially on Podbean. It has an app. You can catch up on missed episodes and also get a notification when we have new episodes. Do you have a question for our guest, feedback on the episode, or a suggestion for a future guest? Then please get in touch with us by sending us an email at talktomo@mosibyl.com or connect with us via Instagram at the More Sibyl Podcast. Cannot wait to hear from you, and thank you so much for always listening.